Support for this episode comes from Edgepark. Life is busy and managing diabetes is a daily, sometimes hourly commitment. Well, Edgepark can help you say goodbye to the worry of managing your diabetes supplies with a variety of cutting-edge insulin delivery systems from brands like Medtronic and Tandem. Plus, Edgepark accepts most insurance plans and handles the paperwork, so you can simplify your life, your diabetes care, and your budget in one click. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Edgepark logo.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, I spent a lot of time this summer at diabetes conferences, and the top question I got from parents was, how did we make Benny so independent with his T1D? How do I not worry about all the crazy stuff he's done, going away to non-diabetes sleepaway camps, traveling abroad without us, and now college? Well, of course I do worry, but there are some things I've learned that may make it easier for you. I'm going to explain my parenting pivot from doing it all for my toddler to now customer support. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to have you here for another week of Diabetes Connections. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. If you're new around here, my son was diagnosed with type 1 when he was 2. He's now 19. I have a daughter who does not have type 1. She's a couple years older than Benny. My husband lives with type 2. I don't have any kind of diabetes, but I have a background in broadcasting and journalism, and that is how you get the show. It is pretty much vacation season, and while I'm working on interviews and updates for upcoming podcast episodes, I'm taking a little break with my family right now. More about that in the podcast schedule a little bit later on. But, it's been a busy summer, like most people are having, especially going to the ADA conference, which I haven't done very often, and to Friends for Life, which I've gone to forever. But it is so interesting to talk to people at these conferences. Healthcare providers are always curious about our newscast episodes. They like those a lot. I don't mind telling you that industry people, those who work at the CGM and the pump companies, they always tell me that they learn a lot about their own companies from this show. And that is so great. I love that. But parents always want to know how we got from doing everything for Benny, who I mentioned was diagnosed as a toddler, to having him be completely independent in his day-to-day care at age 19. We do tag team supply ordering. I plan to keep helping him with that through college. But he makes his own doctor's appointments. He goes without me. And truly, I've joked before, but the only time I know that he's changed any of his technologies, I see the trash. That's it. Usually in the garbage. Usually. This week, I'm bringing you an excerpt from Still the World's Worst Diabetes Mom, the second book in this series. Betty asked me recently if there might be a third book. I told him he'd probably have to write it. My diabetes mom story feels kind of done. Maybe we'll write a college book together. I don't know. No promises. I'm not even going down that road. I do want to let you know that I wrote this chapter while Benny was finishing his junior year in high school, and he is about to start his sophomore year in college. So I'll come back around after, and I'll fill in a couple of blanks on what we did his last year of high school to get him ready to go away for college. All right, the customer support chapter right after this. Most people who take insulin have experienced low blood sugar. It can be disorienting and scary. Very low blood sugar is very scary. And that's where Gvoke HypoPen comes in. Gvoke HypoPen is a ready-to-use rescue pen for treating very low blood sugar in people with diabetes ages 2 and above. If you take insulin or sulfonylureas, you are at risk for your blood sugar going too low. Low blood sugar emergencies can happen unexpectedly, and they demand quick action. You need a safety net when it matters most. Be ready to treat very low blood sugar with Gvoke HypoPen. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Gvoke logo. Gvoke shouldn't be used if you have a tumor in the gland on top of your kidneys called pheochromocytoma, or if you have a tumor in your pancreas called insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk for safety information. Chapter 15. Customer support. Benny's trip to Israel felt like a line in the sand when it came to his diabetes independence. We'd sent him halfway around the world, and he'd done what he needed to do to stay safe and happy. Just after that trip in August, we had our annual chat about the diabetes plan for school. How did he want to manage? As a junior in high school, what did he want from me? Customer support, he said. I didn't understand. What does that mean? I asked. Customer support, Benny said. I'll call you if I need you, but you're not asking me what's up, he explained. That sounded terrible, not because I thought he couldn't manage, but because it represented an enormous change from what had come before. How could the little boy who ran away from shots and insulin pump infusion set changes now be willingly responsible for all of his own care? I agreed to try it if he kept his numbers within a safe range. We talked to his endo, and Dr. V agreed this would be a great time to hand over control. If something went wrong or if Benny wasn't ready, we'd know right away and could jump in to help. As you know, I don't share numbers, but I will tell you that Dr. V and Benny's idea of safe is not my idea of awesome. Even so, it all made sense, and I reluctantly agreed to hand over the reins. There's a duality to being a parent of a child with diabetes, especially if your child is diagnosed very young. The parent does much, if not all, of the care. It can almost feel like the parent has diabetes. It was definitely our condition for the first several years. However, being the parent of a child with diabetes is not at all the same experience of having diabetes. As Benny grows older, it's our job to do less and less. I knew this moment of independence was coming, but that doesn't mean it was easy. For many years, I said that the hardest transition we had was sending Benny to kindergarten. He'd already had T1D for 4 years and had a marvelous experience at our daycare and preschool. Even so, I was terrified to send him to elementary school, and I was on edge for at least the first month. Later, I decided that middle school was our toughest time with type 1. Benny had what I've learned is a very typical experience. He had the brain fog and forgetfulness typical of all tweens, including my daughter, who doesn't live with diabetes, as well as the amazing physical changes, insulin resistance, and blood sugar roller coasters that can come with puberty. If you ask me now, I'd say we're in another tough time, but this one is more about me. It's about letting go. We're transitioning into a completely independent management style. Benny is a year away from college, and many of the schools on his list are far from home. Ironically, as Benny is getting older and more independent, I think about it more as our diabetes than I have in years. Here's an example, but I have to warn you, it doesn't make me look very good. I speak out a lot against the pressure for perfection in our community. You may not realize that I'm often still fighting against that pressure in my own brain. This is the story of one of those internal fights. This was in late 2019 when we were using basal IQ with the untethered method. Benny was in range before bed, hovering around 125. For the last few weeks before this, he'd been dropping about 15 to 20 points overnight, just a little drop and then steady. I thought 125 was a fine number to just leave alone. Benny texted me, yes, this is how we communicate in my house, that he felt low. I glanced again at the Dexcom, and in my head, I said, "You're not low, you're 125. I don't want to treat that. You're going to mess up our great trend, and you're just going to go high. You're going to mess up our great numbers." That's what I was thinking. Here's what I said. "Really? Because Dexcom says 125. You feel low?" And he said, "I feel like I'm dropping. See, now I'm 117. Even without the Dexcom number moving down a smidge, I knew my hesitation was selfish and misguided. All right, it was dumb. He's not foolproof, but Benny knows his body. He'd been living with diabetes for 13 years at this point. He didn't catch every low blood sugar, but he certainly knew what being low feels like. I felt ashamed of what I had just been thinking. You're going to mess up our great numbers? Sadly, I have to admit I thought that. It's his diabetes. It's not mine. It's not ours. And there is no messing up. Chastened, I texted Benny. "Okay, I trust you. Let me grab you a drink. Do you think you need more than that?" "Nope, just a juice box should be fine," he replied. I grabbed a little can of pineapple juice and I poured about 12 to 15 carbs over ice in a highball glass because sometimes it's just got to be fun. Yes, I was making up for my guilt with the splashy cocktail presentation. He didn't know that, but he got a kick out of it. He drank the juice and went right to bed. I turned out my light, but I assumed I would hear that Dexcom high alarm soon. After all, I still believed I had given him 15 carbs he did not need. Instead, I woke up with my regular morning alarm. The Dexcom showed he had stayed between 100 and 130 all night long. He had been feeling low, and he needed that juice. A few weeks later, I attended a JDRF conference. I found myself with 3 adults with type 1, and I told them this story. Their reactions were interesting. They didn't tell me I was a terrible person. I was not told I was a helicopter mom. They simply said, that's got to be tough, and that sounds hard. But all 3 said it was important to remember, now that Benny is older, that those are not my numbers, and it's not my diabetes. They encouraged me to keep having these conversations, even just with myself. They pointed out that even though I'm struggling with how I'm thinking about diabetes, Benny is doing what he needs to do to stay safe and happy. They also encouraged me to realize that the move to independence is gradual and can be full of missteps, even for the parent. How could I have forgotten that last bit? It was reassuring and eye-opening to realize that these adults with type 1 had gone through the transitions my son and I were experiencing. They'd struggled with independence and responsibility on their journey out of the teen years too. Let's back up and talk about these transitions. As I said, it doesn't happen all at once. We didn't go from counting every carb and doing every injection at 2 years of age to letting Benny be completely independent at age 17. It's a gradual, thoughtful, and sometimes emotional process. For me, it was helpful to consider diabetes milestones, sort of like all developmental milestones. These all seem to be a combination of when your child is ready, when societal forces push them to be ready, and when the parent is ready to let go. When Benny was 5, we decided it would be helpful for him to do more with his diabetes care to make kindergarten a bit easier. Our daughter went to the school, so we knew we'd have very helpful educators and staff, but no full-time school nurse. That summer, at our request, the preschool staff transitioned from doing all of his care to watching him do his own blood sugar checks with a meter and pushing the buttons on his pump to dose insulin. He always had an adult watching him, and they stepped in whenever he needed help. When real school started that fall, he just needed an adult who cared and paid attention, looking over his shoulder. It was an immense help, and he felt terrific about how grown up he was. I always like to point out, though, that was only the routine for school. At home, he'd still hold out his hand for me to poke a finger, and we used his pump and meter remote to dose for him. Benny was far from fully independent, which I think is appropriate for a 5-year-old. I remember reading a post on Facebook from a mom of a 7-year-old who was asking why her son couldn't keep up with diabetes tasks. Why couldn't he be more independent? I was surprised. Who expects a 1st or 2nd grader to be diabetes independent? I kept reading, and it turns out she had received some advice about how kids who were pushed to be independent with diabetes, to think about it as their disease, did better long term. I don't believe that's true. I certainly couldn't find any documentation, but who can blame her for wanting the best for her son? She was relieved when a bunch of us commented that independence comes more slowly. I remember being worried because Benny seemed to be a bit behind other kids with T1D. He didn't want to do his own pump set changes until he was well into middle school, and we did all the Dexcom sensor changes until he was 13. He could perform those tasks, and he did them anytime he was away from home, but if we were around, he relied on our help. While I was worried about Benny leaning on us too much at the time, looking back, I believe that reliance was actually an enormous help to him. It balanced the burden of diabetes until he was ready to shoulder more himself. I think one key to his current independence is that we didn't push. We knew there'd come a time when he didn't want our help anymore. We taught him how to do it, supported him, and let him figure it out. That's why I mentioned earlier, it's helpful to look at diabetes readiness in a way similar to other childhood milestones. Before you protest that T1D is completely different, hear me out. Right back to our conversation, but first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. The all-new Dexcom G7 continuous glucose monitoring system is now available. Powerful and simple, Dexcom G7 is proven to lower A1C and help you spend time in range, all without finger sticks, scanning, or calibrations. There are so many amazing new features to talk about, I'm never sure where to begin. Dexcom G7 is 60% smaller than the previous generation and is the most accurate CGM system out there. The 30-minute warm-up period is fantastic and up to 2 times faster than any other CGM brand. And I love the all-in-one sensor and transmitter. To learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. When a parent of an elementary school-age child asks me how they can set their child up for diabetes success, I ask them, when was the last time you washed your child's hair? My daughter has amazing long and curly hair. One of her friends in kindergarten called it mermaid hair, if that helps you picture it. Gorgeous, but hard to take care of. We struggled so much combing it out when she was little, styling it as she got older. One day when she was maybe 11 or 12, I looked at her bouncy, tangle-free curls and realized I couldn't remember the last time she'd asked me for help. I also like to joke to parents of younger children that one day, the only time they will see their kids' underwear is when they're doing laundry. Remember when you used to have to get your kids dressed every day? For some kids, that goes on for what seems like forever, even into middle school. No judgment, there are a bunch of reasons for that. But in almost every situation, that kid is going to wake up one morning and decide their mom will never see them naked again. That happened to us with diabetes. Gradually, Benny just didn't want my help. Every summer, I expected Benny to come home from diabetes camp or regular sleepaway camp where he did everything himself and be ready to kick me out of his care. It was much more gradual, and each step of management happened on its own timeline. He figured out how to give himself shots, something he'd been very frightened of, when he wanted to take a pump break. He was 10, and I told him he could go back to MDI no problem, but that I didn't think he wanted me following him to school and around the neighborhood to do all of his shots. Benny agreed. He summoned up his courage and gave himself a shot. The pump break only lasted about 4 days, but he's been able to give himself shots ever since. Another big turning point came when technology got better. Dexcom's G6 was released when Benny was 13. It has a much simpler applicator than previous versions. Who remembers the frightening design of the G4 and G5? The applicator was large and scary looking. The application was awkward. The G6 is a simple push button. Benny was nervous about that first application, but wanted to try it himself. It went so well that in over 4 years since, I've never changed his Dexcom sensor. That step forward helped him feel better about pump infusion sets as well. He was already doing those at camp and anytime he was away from home. I can't pinpoint the exact day he started doing them completely on his own, but it was sometime around the age of 13 or 14. One day, during his freshman year of high school, I realized the only way I know he's changing gear is when I hear giant coughs from the kitchen and when I see the diabetes trash in the garbage. Do you know about the cough trick? I read a study years ago that coughing during injections alleviated pain. The researchers didn't know exactly how, but the idea is that the nervous system gets a bit confused and concentrates on the cough and not the pain. It works amazingly well for Benny. He does it for every infusion set and Dexcom change. Be careful if someone else is handling the needle, though. The person coughing may move or jerk suddenly and create an issue. I'll credit more technology for another change, this one on my end. Because Control IQ has been so helpful, I receive fewer and fewer Dexcom alerts. We already had a system in place where I don't text or call him for every alert and alarm. And between Control IQ and him being so responsive, I rarely had to reach out. This was also during COVID, so he was in the house most of the time. In the fall of 2020, I turned off the Dexcom high alert. In the spring of 2021, I turned off the low alert. Since then, the only alarms I get are for urgent lows, 55 or below. Do I still check Dexcom a few times a day? Of course I do. But not having all the alarms on my end gives Benny a chance to take care of situations and learn to troubleshoot without me texting him. There are even days where I only check in the morning and just before bed. The one thing I couldn't seem to give up was asking, Did you bolus? Unless I physically saw him take the pump out and give himself insulin, I was always asking. Even after we switched to customer support, this went on for a few months. He was getting annoyed, and it wasn't helping. In January of 2022, I decided I had to stop. No more nagging. I wouldn't ask about bolusing. I didn't tell Benny I was making a change. I simply did it. I wish I could tell you things magically got better and he remembered to pre-bolus for every meal. He didn't. What did change, though, was the tension. Recently, customer support has stepped up just a bit. As I'm writing this chapter in May of 2022, Benny is having an incredibly stressful time. Junior year finals, ACT prep, his part-time job, and even some travel shoved in has made it a bananas couple of weeks. He's asked me for help with diabetes tasks like filling cartridges, and I've pushed a little to see if it's okay for me to also remind him to change infusion sets and maybe even remind him to bolus. I keep telling myself this is why we gave him independence while he's still home. He needs to figure out how to make diabetes missteps in a safe environment, and I need to let him. Ask your doctor. Knowing my child's age and stage of diabetes, would you recommend any additional steps toward independence in care, either at school or at home? Can you share any technology tips to make insertion easier or recommend ways my child might help with management when they're ready? If my child is pushing for more independence, can you help us make a plan that keeps them safe and keeps me reassured?
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
You can find The World's Worst Diabetes Mom series anywhere you get books and anywhere you get audiobooks. Amazon, Audible. You can buy the book, the paperback copy of the book, on the website, diabetes-connections.com. Whatever form is easier for you is where I would love for you to read the books. So let me know if you have any issues, but especially if you've got Audible and you've got credits, this is a really easy get. As I mentioned, I want to highlight a couple of things that have changed since I wrote that chapter. Senior year of high school, and we had planned to do this for a very long time, we had Benny just be independent, completely independent in his day-to-day care. I had gradually already turned off Dexcom alarms. I had no high alerts. I had no low alerts by the time he started to be a senior in high school. I did turn off my urgent low alarm, which was really hard to do. But that's how we felt. Complete independence would be encompassed by him. And the thinking here was that we all could identify weaknesses. I'm not quite sure what word to use, but like places where he needed to shore up stuff before he went to college. We could identify that while he was still in our house, while he was still surrounded by people who knew him and understood stuff. So I felt really good about that. I say I felt good about it. I felt good about the attempt and the philosophy. I hated it, and it was very, very difficult. It got easier as the year went on, and I could see that he could do it, but boy, it was really hard. And then, as many of you know, he spent the summer before he went to college away. He was a lifeguard at that camp he'd gone to forever. So he was gone for almost 10 weeks. That stunk. I didn't get to see him at all, really, before he went to college. But he had really wanted to do this. And he did really well. He had to do some troubleshooting that summer. He did it on his own. Would I have done things differently? Sure. Do I think I would have managed him differently? Yeah. But, at the time he was 18, there are also lots of other things going on in his life besides diabetes that I would like him to do differently. That's just parenting. And now, if you want to see how we're managing, we just had an episode recently with him talking about college. I still don't follow. I still struggle with that a little bit, but I do think it's better for us, and it's worked out really well for him. And he has been home this summer with me. I find it a little bit more difficult not to follow when he's actually in my house. I don't know if that makes any sense. But when he's in front of me, and I want to say, like, did you bolus? Did you change your infusion set? How are your supplies going? Like when he's here, I really want to be in his face. It's easier when he's away. I don't know if everybody has that experience, but that's how it's been for me. So I'm biting my tongue a lot this summer. As I mentioned, taking some family time. And boy, this is hard as the kids get older. This is our 1 week for the whole summer that all four of us are going to be together. So I'm really excited. We're going to visit my mom and dad. Then we're going to take a little bit of a New England trip together. So there will be no podcast episodes the first week of August. So that means no In the News, no regular episode. We will be back for our regularly scheduled programming around August 13th. Of course, I'll be on social media. I do have some announcements coming up about Mom's Night Out, We'll be announcing speakers and check-ins for Denver and Philadelphia. Super excited about that. So there'll be some scheduled posts and scheduled emails that you might get, but hopefully everything is going smoothly as we are just hanging out together on the road. All right, thanks to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.
For many of you, as you listen, this is going to sound like a weird question. Why do you use the insulin pump you've got on right now? There's a really good chance that you went on that pump 15 or 20 years ago because it's what your doctor had back then, and you've never really thought about changing. That was us until Benny's Pump Company went out of business. And I was amazed how much things had changed when we looked for a new one. I'm telling you, it is time to take advantage of what's new. If you need a sign to switch, this is it. Omnipod 5. The tubeless automated insulin delivery system is here, and it's available through the pharmacy, which means that you can try it today, even if your tubed pump is under warranty. Fill out the quick online form, see if you're eligible for a free trial. Go to diabetes-connections.com, click on the Omnipod logo. For full safety risk information and free trial terms and conditions, visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections.